Okay, so I never thought I would have to make this video, but a comment I saw on Twitter under one of my posts really made me like viscerally upset. So let's just talk about this Eren Yeager being a slave to freedom shit, right? Because I recently was talking about a video I made called Eren Targaryen, right? And in that video, 3 years ago, mind you, before the final chapter was released, right? So way before the final episode was released, right? In that video, I say, oh yeah, Eren was a slave to freedom, right? Because in the context of the story, to make the themes and stuff work, if everyone's a slave to something, that means, okay, if we have to say that Eren is a slave to something, it's to his desire to be free. However, that is the shittiest piece of like hot trash on the planet, the way it's depicted in the anime and with the way the series ends. Up until the second to last chapter, being a slave to freedom meant, yeah, even if it's at the cost of my life, even if it's at the cost of my dear friends that I love so much, even if it's at the cost of my own morals, right? I don't want to kill innocent people, but if it means that I get to be free, which is my birthright, I was born with the right to be free, then fuck it, I'm pursuing that. Regardless of anything I believe, I am pursuing my birthright, which is freedom. Therefore, sorry innocent civilians, sorry pregnant women, sorry babies, sorry my dear beloved friends. In pursuit of my goals, you may end up losing your life. That's how much I care about freedom. Being a slave to freedom is an oxymoron. It's like saying this is cold fire, right? Like shit like that. Cold fire, frozen fire, a silent scream, stuff like that. Those are oxymorons. There is no way for there to be a frozen fire. There is no way for there to be a slave to freedom. People have taken that literal as fuck, and it's almost as if Isayama went on TikTok, Twitter, whatever himself, and saw people saying, well, yeah, it does actually make sense that he's a slave to freedom, in the most literal sense ever. Oh, he has no agency because he's a slave to freedom. That does not make sense. He is a slave to freedom in the sense that despite all of these morals he has, he doesn't want to kill innocent people. He doesn't want to kill pregnant women. He doesn't want to take away other people's birthrights, right? But in pursuit of his own birthright of freedom, since Marley and the rest of the world are against his birthright right of freedom and life, he is willing to say goodbye, to kiss his morals goodbye in pursuit of freedom. That is what he means up until that final chapter, up until that last episode, by he is a slave to freedom. And that is good. That is good writing. That is perfect. That makes sense. If this character that what Levi said in season 1, he's a monster, not because of the Titan ability, but because there is no cage you can put his soul, his essence, his being in. You cannot cage someone like him. That is what makes him a monster. That is what putting that in place with, if a character like that has to be a slave to freedom, what that means is that character will do whatever he needs to do in pursuit of that freedom. That does not mean he is a literal slave and has no agency. That does not mean that. But it does in the final episode. And that is why it's shit. That is why it's garbage. That is why it is nonsensical. It's taking what what Kenny said, literal. It takes what Kenny said to Levi, literal. Everyone was a slave to something, right? Eren being a slave to freedom does not make sense. Rod Reese was a slave to prostitutes. This other person, Pixis, a slave to liquor, right? Like, everyone being a slave to something makes sense, right? It makes sense, okay? But here is this character who was specifically written to be the antithesis of that. He is no slave to anything. He is not a slave to anything at all but his own desires. And that's only in the sense that he would rather burn the entire world than give up his freedom. And that's the way he was written since chapter 1. That's the way he was written and characterized since the beginning of the anime. It's a paradox, him being a slave to freedom. Well, it was. And so even at the end of the series, even at that last episode that makes absolute jack shit, right? With him not knowing his motivations, in one chapter, in one episode, he suddenly is all mixed up. He doesn't know his real motivation, blah, 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 blah. When nothing has changed from the last episode to a few episodes back, when he started the rumbling, nothing has changed. Since he made his declaration of war speech, since he, hear me all Eldians, these titans will walk and trample until they fucking crush everything. Nothing has changed. And if something has in his psyche, as the audience, we should have seen that. As the audience, we should have been made aware of the exact moment where he decided to do this Lelouch ending, right? We should have been made aware of the second his brain got all mixed up, right? We should have been aware. Okay, some people will argue when he kissed Historia's hand, that's when he got all mixed up, past, present, and future. Okay, well then it doesn't make sense that he was expertly maneuvering memories to get Grisha to give him the Titans to kill the Reese children. That stuff doesn't make sense. Being a slave to freedom does not make sense in that sense. It makes sense in the sense that if this character who cannot be caged by anything, like his motivation, his agency cannot be caged or changed. Okay, well, if a person like that is a slave to anything, they're a slave to their own incessant need to keep moving forward, to break barriers, to break down walls, figuratively and literally, right? So in the last chapter / last episode, when he fucking blatantly says straight out, I guess I'm a slave to freedom, Armin. No, he's not. That's not even true in the final episode. Because if he was truly a slave to his own freedom, he would have ensured that he lived. He would have actually stuck to his goals, right? Which was saving Paradis, not by leaving 20% alive. He would have completed the rumbling. If this is a character actually a slave to his own freedom, correct me if I'm wrong. So that line being in the last episode is the dumbest shit I've ever seen in my life because it does not make sense. He was a slave to Ymir or a slave to Paths. That is what he should have said to Armin in the end for the end to make sense. Because that's not a slave to freedom. A slave to freedom would have pursued it at all costs. But guess what? There's a plot thread at the end where he's like, I literally tried to kill 100%, but you guys killed me at 80. So I'm going to get 80% killed, I guess. Oh, but then he says, I did it so you guys could be superheroes for the rest of the world. And these people say the ending's good? And these people are completely sound in the logic of the ending? There is no logic in the ending. There is no Eren in the end of the series. It's like so bad that it has to be intentional. It's way worse than Game of Thrones. Because Daenerys, you could at least kind of see where she's coming from. She hates these fucking people. These are the people who cast her out of King's Landing and made her grow up in fucking Timbuktu. And she has all this rage from being beaten, raped, abused, sold. So all of that rage culminates at the end where she's like, okay, yeah, I won queen, but it was too easy. I've suffered way too much. I need other people to suffer. And that, to me, is a better ending for a character that kind of grows up pretty similarly to Eren, honestly, besides the whole monarchy shit. That, to me, makes more sense than a character being like, hey, it's kill or be killed, but I'm going to bring everyone in Paradis and Eldians and tell them that I'm going to do the rumbling for their sake. But I'm joking. I'm actually just doing it for a handful of my friends who I want to make heroes. But I'm joking. I'm actually doing it because I want to see a barren wasteland. But I'm joking because I just want to... I actually really do want to kill 100% of people. So who are the friends going to be heroes to? And then he also says he didn't even know if his friends would survive. And then Sasha dies. It's like, what? And Hanji and Levi almost fucking died. He did not know if anybody would survive it. So how is he trying to make people heroes? Huh? What? How is he a slave to freedom when he dies at the end and he damns his people? How is he a slave to his own freedom when he said in Paths that he does not want to fucking die? He told Armin that. I don't want to die. Armin's like, find another way. If Eren was a slave to freedom, he would have found another way. Tell me not. Tell me not. So it was him being a slave to freedom in this like super non-literal sense was good. That was good writing up until the last I would say 2 episodes, and I would say final 3 chapters. Him being a slave to freedom, like just if we're to say this character is a slave to anything, then he's a slave to freedom. That's good. That's good writing. But in the end, for him to literally, like in the anime itself, because it's not in the manga, they added that to polish up a little bit. Isayama was going through Reddit and Twitter, and he was like, wait, here... The people are saying that this would make it good if he was a slave to freedom. And then I could say that he was a slave. And then it would make more sense that he lost his mind because he's a slave and he's just following this... Like, you know, like, no. It doesn't make sense because a slave to freedom would do anything to persevere their own freedom. Not die. And if he was in love with Mikasa and he's a slave to freedom, then he would have done all he could in his power to be with her. Tell me not. Tell me not. And then Paths, the way Paths works is so fucking arbitrary and so pulling a rabbit out of someone's ass. Hey, fucking Ymir, change the way I look. Make me a fucking 5'11" foot tall blonde guy. So when this rumbling's over, they're looking for Eren Yeager. I can change my name to fucking Paul Blart Moop Coop. And then after the rumbling, me and Mikasa can be together. If you're a slave to freedom, you would do anything in your power to make sure your wants and needs, things your birthright is realized. If you are a slave to freedom, literally, like he fucking tells Armin he is. That's why it doesn't work. That's why it's too on the nose and it does not work in the last episode. And just to reiterate why it was good pre-chapter 139, pre-final episode, is because if this character who Levi, it's set up that no cage you can keep Eren in would ever cage his spirit. It's set up and it's realized up until the last chapter, up until the last episode. So of course, if a character like that is a slave to anything, he's a slave to his own agency. Which is cold fire, frozen fire, silent scream. If you're a slave to your own agency, you are not a slave. If you are a slave to freedom, you are not a slave. That's why it was good. This motherfucker is so, like, uncageable, unstoppable, that if he's a slave to anything, it's to his own fucking freedom. Hope that helps. Hope that explains it. So, pre 139, you could say Eren was a slave to freedom and it would make sense. After 139, after the last episode, he was not a slave to freedom. He was a slave to other outside forces, which make no sense.